Good afternoon. So I don't know everybody. I'm Tom Bailey. I'm the president of Teachers College, but I used to be the director of the Community College Research Center. So I'm glad that you allowed me to come back for this. So I'm really pleased to introduce Paul Osterman, who is this will take 4 or 5 minutes here to do this, the Nanyang Technology University Professor of Human Resources and Management, MIT Sloan School of Management, and the Professor, MIT Department of Urban Studies and Planning. And he's going to talk about skills training and the future of work. And this is part of an MIT task force on the future of work. And we're at CCRC working with Paul and the task force on a project. So I'm very happy about that. I just want to say a few things. So I'm not introducing Paul because I took his resume and read it and tell you some things because I've known Paul for many years. When I started at MIT, he was, the year I started, he finished his degree and he was hanging around there, so I got to know him. And we were sort of part of a group of people studying work, still doing that. Paul's dissertation was on youth employment, and he wrote a book, Getting Started, which I really sort of took as a model of taking your dissertation and turning it into a book. And actually, I tried to do that. I mean, I did it. I'm not sure how successful that was. But I used it. Mine was about immigration and employment, sort of competition. And part of the issue of competition was whether they were competing with youth. So I had many citations of Getting Started in my dissertation. Now, certainly talking about the nature of work and technology is a long, Paul's been doing that. I've certainly done some of that, and it's kind of a constant discussion. I mean, the sort of mystique of technology is going to do things and take our jobs away. And of course, combining that with the kind of the fundamental issue of work and how important it is to us, we've been talking about that for a long time. Now, I must say, whatever happens to work, because of technology, I think the one job that I think is safe is studying the effect of work on technology, technology on work. So I think we have a full employment policy for that. Now, of course, this issue is really important for ed schools, for teachers' college, for education in general, because if you think about whatever effects you think will happen, there's sort of a universal conclusion that some response to that is going to be through education. So whether you're conservative or whether you're a liberal, education will be part of the solution. Now, what kind of education and who gets it and how it's paid for, those may be different. But it is kind of an interesting way of having a conversation across differences of opinion. Now, CCRC, of course, has focused a lot on this issue. I mean, our focus there has been, making sure that students know what skills they need. That's a crucial part about that. And then whatever goals they have about work, our job has been to try to help community colleges do the best they can to make sure that students can actually arrive at that place. So now, one of the things I think that I like about Paul's work and the emphasis that he's had is that, the effect of we don't just have to consider the effect of technology kind of an immutable force that we have to adjust to. That is, adjust whether by universal income, so everybody will be unemployed except one person, and we pay everybody else to be idle, or whether it's through education. So I think that one thing that you'll hear, and I think he's emphasized, is that we actually have some control over the quality of work. That is, through unions, through other kind of political activity, through institutions, through policy. And I think if you look at some of the titles of his, I think I counted up to 14 books that he's written, Making Jobs Better, an Industry Strategy, Good Jobs America, Making Work Better for Everyone, Working in America, a Blueprint for a New Labor Market, Change at Work, The Mutual Gains Enterprise, Forging a Winning Partnership Among Labor Management and Government, and Employment Futures, Reorganizing Dislocation and Public Policy. So as I said, it's not just a question of, we're subject to these changes that we have to react to, but rather, if really think about that, we don't have to just put up with whatever that change is, that in fact, as a society, we really have a way in which we can change that and influence the quality of work, which then we can combine with other types of policies that help us adjust to whatever that change is. So, Paul, it's been a long time coming for us to have a collaboration, and I'm really glad that we're doing it now, and look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Tom. Actually, now I'm upset because Tom read those titles of those books. It kind of sounds, if I were you, I'd think, oh, he's written one book and keeps every 2 years changes the title. He changes the picture on the cover and publishes again. It has that sound to it. So I hope it's not true. It's not true. Those books are somewhat different. Just don't run those. You must all have this cheating software so you can see if I've plagiarized myself. Can you self-plagiarize? Someone in this room must know that. I've known Tom for a long time. My dominant image of Tom is I'm standing on the top of a ski hill and Tom is going down at about 60 miles an hour, and I'm trying to find a way off. And so I've gone on ski trips with Tom and his family. We've worked together, and so it's really great to be here. And I'm really appreciative of Tom Brock for inviting me. I do live in this world of job training and employment and training, and CCRC is absolutely the gold standard when it comes to thinking about community colleges and effectiveness and research and best practice. And I've drawn on CCRC's website and research for decades now. So I'm going to talk about skills training and the future of work. I'm not quite sure how long I'm going to talk for. I'm not an insane economist. I'm capable of stopping. 30, 35, 40 minutes, I'm not sure. And then we're going to have questions and answers. So that's kind of the plan. So I got to turn this on. So as Tom Bailey says, the future of work is on everybody's mind. So this is a random headline about an occupation you think might not be subject to robotization, but the New York Times wants to tell you that they are. And as Tom said also, MIT has woken up to this, as has everybody. One of the things that our task force does is to keep a list of everybody else's task force on this topic. Seriously, and it is a long, 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 long list of people who are worried about this. So I'm going to begin by kind of telling you somewhat humble about this. So this is 1960 when Jack Kennedy was elected president. 25% of workers were blue collar. It's probably around 14 or 15% now. Computer programmer was actually not in a census list of occupations. Women were a minority in the workforce, and the organization Man, which was how firms take care of their workers and their one big happy family, was a best-selling book. So none of that's true now. So projecting into the future is a fraught enterprise. And I'm not really going to project very far into the future. And in fact, our task force at MIT, we're not thinking more than 10-ish years in advance. It would be kind of foolish to do that. I'm going to talk about what I think are the main challenges in the job market. I'm going to provide some insight into what is happening, but also I'm going to spend some time talking about what's not happening. And then I'm going to spend more time on skills and training. As Tom suggested, that's kind of a central issue. So this is my favorite New Yorker cover. You see all these robots going to work, and they're giving a little bit of money to this poor one human being sitting there on the sidewalk. So the question is that the future? And the answer is that's not the future. First off, people have been saying this forever. So this is a quote from under President Johnson, 1964 ad hoc committee on the triple revolution. I actually don't even know what the triple revolution was. but this is a quote. Cybernation is going to take over jobs, and it's going to totally change everything. And this is a concern, this is a fear that goes back a long ways, but it's not true. So let's take one example just to kind of explain why it's analytically why it's not true. Word processing. That's a computer technology. So what does word processing do? Well, for me, Paul, word processing is a complement, to use economics jargon. It makes me more productive, right? I can write more articles that no one will ever read now that I have access to a word processor. So I'm more productive. In some sense, the price of an article has gone down because I can produce more of them. But I'm a better worker as a result of that technology. The typing pool, if any of you remembers what a typing pool was, that's gone. So sure enough, technology has wiped out a set of jobs. And then the administrative assistant, who used to be called a secretary, the administrative assistant is still there, but the job has changed, and it's changed substantially. So that person now organizes meetings, helps students fill out their financial aid forms, works on projects of one kind or another as a result of the word processing. So the job has been redesigned. So we have, in this one simple example, a technology which has made some people more productive, wiped out other jobs, and restructured other jobs. And that's fundamentally the story about technology on a larger scale. So part of it is due to technology itself, the nature of the technology. And part of it, as I'll talk about a little bit, is also due to politics and power. The decision about those jobs that get restructured, what do they look like, and who does what, is not handed down from on high. It's the outcome of a process. Now, in saying that, I have to tell you that that's a somewhat non-orthodox thing to say in the context of economics. For those of you who are economists or read the economics, economics kind of a implicit idea and often made explicit is the notion that there's an optimal way of organizing work that's the most cost-effective, efficient, cost-minimizing. And so technology drives towards that, and the firms that don't adopt those optimal organizational styles are going to be competed out of business. And, oh my God, I want to see fewer notifications. That's actually an argument that I think is wrong. And I'm going to spend a little time talking about it today, but it's actually a deep question in this debate. It goes to, and there's an older literature around this, for those of you who, around the implementation, for example, of automated machine tools, CNC production in machine shops, looking at cross-sections of different firms adopting the same technology and organizing work differently. And for those of you who are looking for a dissertation topic, looking at matched samples of firms who adopt the same technology and observing how they do it differently and the consequences for the workforce is a great dissertation topic. Give me a call. To say that technology is not going to wipe out jobs is not to deny that there'll be challenges, and we're going to talk about those challenges. A little piece of evidence. After all this talk, the Pew folks who do surveys on pretty much any topic you can imagine surveyed the American workforce and asked, has anyone lost their job because of a robot, a machine, or software? The answer is 2% of American workers report having lost a job because of a robot, machine, or software, and 5% say that they had their hours or pay reduced. Today, and this is after decades of, robots are not a new thing, software is not a new thing, right? This is after decades of this. So, as I just said, think about the implementation of technology and how it's being introduced and what the choices are, and think about the adjustment mechanisms, but don't be hysterical that the robot's going to come and take your job away. Now, there's also a substantial worry out there that the employment relationship itself is radically changing. The careers are dead. that we're all going to become independent contractors, that work is going to be Uberized. This is a fear that's independent of the technology. It may be assisted by technology, but it need not be. And this is a very common discourse. This is not true either. So the fear is, just to say what the motivations are, the fear is that financial engineering is putting pressure on firms to squeeze, 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 that the norms have changed. The organization man is no longer the dominant book. Instead, it's re-engineering the corporation, which had a very different message to it. That politically, there's been a push to the right, and that's led to a weakening of worker power and kind of the degradation of job quality, and competition is much more intense. But again, the evidence on this, not on those forces, but the evidence on the Uberization of work and independent contractors is much milder. So this is a chart that shows you what percentage of the American workforce are independent contractors, 1099. Over time, it's flat. It's flat. We're not becoming a nation of independent contractors. And this is a chart that tells you what percentage of American workers work via online platforms. Uber, TaskRabbit, Mechanical Turk. Less than half of 1% of American workers are on those online platforms. And it's also true, although this chart doesn't say it, that the vast majority of that 0.5% are people who are doing it part-time and have other jobs and are doing the online stuff to supplement their income. So we're not becoming a nation, a free agent nation. We're not becoming a free agent nation. We're not becoming a gig labor market. There are some significant changes. Job security is weaker, particularly for middle-aged men. Contracting out is growing. So I don't know this for a fact, but it wouldn't surprise me. People who clean the building used to be Columbia University employees, and now they work for the XYZ cleaning company. That's contracting out. And that's happening up and down the spectrum of the labor market. And that is a challenge. Sometimes this contracting out takes place because there's scarce skills, so people who can do C++, right? You don't need it all the time, but you need some of it, so you contract it out. But sometimes this contracting out takes place because the organization wants to squeeze compensation by forcing, for example, cleaning companies to bid against each other on the basis of cost to get the Columbia University contract to clean this building, or the MIT contract to clean this building. So those are changes which are problematic. There's positive changes too. The spread of team systems, what's called high commitment, high performance work organizations. And so there is kind of a war going on in the labor market between forces aiming to degrade jobs and forces aiming to upgrade jobs. And that's the kind of, I think, the more fundamental trend to look at. But my focus today for the rest of this talk is going to be a little different than any of that. I'm going to talk about the low-wage job market, because that's what I think is the fundamental challenge we face. So here are the data. In 2017, among what are called prime age workers, people between, not kids, right? These aren't kids, people between the age of 25 and 64, 17% earned less than $12 an hour. 29% earned less than $15 an hour. Now those are poverty level wages. The adults are earning, not kids, adults are earning. And even more upsetting is that there's been no progress on this. So I picked the year 2000 because it was also a business cycle peak. It was the end of the Clinton boom. The numbers are basically the same. Clearly there's some kind of structural problem in the American labor market that produces widespread low-wage jobs. And so in my view, and this is not a view that's entirely shared by everybody on the MIT task force or any task force, but in my view, this is the fundamental challenge for the work of the future, is to figure out what to do about this and how to shrink this. Okay? That's what I'm focused on. There are multiple reasons why there's so many low-wage jobs. So I did recently do a book that looked at specific low-wage industries. And so, for example, when I say the floor is broken, I mean labor standards are not enforced. The minimum wage is not enforced. There's extensive wage theft. This happens, these are issues very common in residential construction, which is a low-wage industry. Very common in restaurants. In retail and manufacturing, there's pressures to outsource, and there's supply chain issues in which the supplier on the bottom is squeezed. Restaurants, the front of the restaurant is white, the back of the restaurant are people of color. There's race and there's gender issues. Across the board, worker voice is weakened. By that I mean unions. Skill issues are true across the board. And the other thing that's missing from this chart is across the board, there's an what to use economist jargon, there's almost an endless supply of people willing to work for low wages, and that suppresses compensation. So there's multiple reasons why there's a problem of low wages in America, which, by the way, speaks directly to broader issues of inequality. Now, how do you think about what to do about this moving forward? One set of policies is to strengthen the floor. That is to say, raise the minimum wage, push for living wage campaigns, the fight for 15, all of that. Another set of policies has to do with enforcing existing standards. Misclassification, instead of you being an employee, I misclassify you as an independent contractor so you don't have to pay benefits, for example, or workers' compensation. Joint employer responsibility. If McDonald's tells its franchises how people who work for them have to dress, how people who work for them have to act, what the rules are in that franchise, should McDonald's be jointly responsible for employment standards? Very controversial issue. Wage theft, just stealing jobs, stealing wages. There's actually a big article in the New York Times this past week about a car wash and a wage theft case in a car wash in which the state went after effectively that car wash. So that's a set of policies to raise the floor in the low-wage labor market. Unions, where they exist, raise wages. My favorite example is the people, when you check into a hotel, there's someone who's going to clean your room. If that person is represented by HERE, the Hotel Restaurant Workers Union, that person's probably making about $23, $24 an hour. If they're not, they're probably making $13 an hour. And I'm saying nothing about how many rooms they have to clean in the course of the day. So that's a strategy. And then the final kind of strategy that's very au courant is moving firms to the quote, the high road. That is to say, the idea is that there's two ways of organizing work: squeeze the workforce or invest in the workforce. Theoretically, they're both equally profitable. And so how do you move firms? How do you move firms to the high road? Now, a quick assessment, my assessment of these strategies, is that the raise the floor strategy works. It has few negative impacts. Now that, I have to tell you also, is not a universally accepted statement. There's a debate in the literature about the consequences of raising the minimum wage or the fight for 15, but in my view, it has few negative impacts. But the resulting standards are still well below what you would consider to be an acceptable family wage. Countervailing power would work, except it's not working. Unions represent about 6.5% of the private sector workforce today. Moving firms to the high road is something I've thought a lot about. Making the case to an employer that the high road is equally profitable, I think, is a tough case to make. It's not tough to make the case that if you pay your workers better and train them better, they're more productive. It's not tough to make the case that there's less turnover, these kind of intermediate benefits. But are the firms more profitable? Well, there's a cost to paying them more. It's called paying them more. And it's not at all clear, except in a few cases, that it's a more profitable path. I think a lot of this is rhetoric. Now, in another conversation, we could say, should you force firms to give up some profits in order to treat the workforce better? But that's a different conversation. So here I want to focus on another set of policies, which is skills and training. Now, I have to tell you that when I talk to my friends, and I have many friends, I mean, I consider myself part of kind of the progressive public policy community, there's a lot of skepticism about a skills and training strategy to address low wages. The skepticism comes because of the fear of blaming the victim. Now, this may seem strange to you because you're all in the business of skills and training. But in the policy world, it's not strange. So there's two kind of blaming the victim, at least in the progressive policy world. There's two kinds of blaming the victim stories out there. One is Charles Murray, kind of the kind of social science, right-wing social science view that people are poor because they don't have any skills. And they deserve to be poor. They didn't invest in their education, and they're at fault. Poverty and low wages are because people don't deserve to be paid more. They're getting paid what they're worth. A more sophisticated story is what you would call the Davos-style argument. Everyone know about Davos? You all just got back, right? So this is where the elite goes to talk about the problems of the world. So the solution to inequality, many in Davos argue, and this, when I say the elite, I'm talking about the Silicon Valley elite. I'm talking about the banking community elite. I'm talking about the elite. The solution to inequality is upskilling people. Stephen Schwartzman, who I should say just donated about $2 billion to MIT to start a new college. Stephen Schwartzman, chief of Blackstone, says the lack of education in digital is absolutely shocking. It has to be changed, he says. This will very much lessen the inequalities that people have in terms of job opportunities. So the Davos diagnosis, along with the Charles Murray diagnosis, is that the problem with low wages and inequality lies with the people, and we need to fix the people. Now, this argument, in my view, radically exaggerates the role of digital skills and the digital economy in explaining why wages are low in personal services and restaurants and so on. And it's also very self-interested. It ignores tax structure. It ignores political influence in shaping market. You know what it ignores. Nonetheless, at the end of the day, I want to make the case, and this is probably not a case that needs to be made in this room, but it is a case that needs to be made in the progressive policy community, that skills and training are fundamental. It would be naive not to think that for many people, skills aren't the issue. So I have a little thing that says, I work with a lot of job training programs. I run around the country and do that. And you talk to job training programs, and they will tell you about the skill levels of the people who walk in the door looking for better jobs. So actually, 2 weeks ago, I asked the job training program that I respect a great deal for data. So they gave me data on people who are applying for pharmacy tech jobs. Pharmacy tech, you know, when you go to CVS and you ask for your latest dosage of whatever you're taking this week, is the person who will hand you that, check on your name, make sure your insurance is okay, and so forth and so on. It's a job that in a pharmacy pays about $15 an hour, and in a hospital pays in the low 20s an hour. It's a decent job. In this job training program in Boston, the people who applied, you had to have a high school degree to even apply. About 40% scored below the 9th grade level in the TABE tests for English and math. Skills were a dramatic issue to get these decent jobs. There's just no question about it. The PIAC test, which is an OECD test of literacy in math, shows substantial problems among US adults and shows a correlation to labor market outcomes. So while it is true that the kind of the Davos rhetoric is in some respects misleading. Nonetheless, skills and training remain a fundamental issue, I think. But there are hard questions. One is, again, speaking to my hypothetical conversation with my colleagues, how does it connect to a broader job training agenda, job quality agenda? Well, in a tight labor market, programs can provide a workforce to firms in return for better wage standards. So the same job training program that I just described goes to, where the labor market is very tight in Boston, says to firms, if you want to hire our pharmacy tech people who we've trained, you're going to have to pay them more than you do now. A training program can bring overlooked labor force, either demographically overlooked or overlooked by neighborhood, into the firm and make long-term changes in how firms hire. Training programs can help create career ladders to improve job quality. So in the hospital example, moving people from working in the kitchen or being orderlies into technician jobs in the hospital. And in a union setting, training can be a win-win item on an agenda. So training can connect to a job quality agenda. Who should bear the cost of training? What's the public responsibility? So firms complain that they can't get a skilled workforce, and they say to the community colleges or the job training programs, give that to us, please. Well, it might remind you of stadiums. It might remind you, not to raise a sensitive, I put this in more recently, it might remind you of Amazon. Who should pay for training? Who should pay for training? Should the public sector be subsidizing firms? And that is a tough question. It is arguably the case, to speak on behalf of the employer community here, it's arguably the case that skills today are more general than they used to be. General skills, for those of you who study these things, are skills that are useful at a range of firms. And so it's hard for any given firm to provide training in general skills because the people will be poached. Someone else will take advantage of the training. And computer skills, soft skills, reading are heavily emphasized now. And they probably are more general and more difficult for firms to provide. Customized training can be in the public interest if it has a positive redistributional component, bringing in people into the firm and into the workforce who otherwise would be excluded, or if it helps to save jobs. But this is a question, I think, that every training program and every community college needs to address. Who should be paying? Does training even work? So there's a conservative critique, that training doesn't work, and that these kinds of training investments occur too late in life, and we should be, for example, focusing on pre-K. I mean, this is a serious argument that's out there. So what do we know about whether training works? Well, who are the providers? Community colleges are providers. Job training programs are providers. Union apprenticeship programs are providers. There's a bunch of new players out there. Coding academies, distance learning. So what do we know about whether training works? Well, I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide because you'll laugh me out of the place. But there's a slide about community colleges, of which I probably got these data off the CCRC website. There are about 1,200 nationally, and they're huge. They're the major training operation in America. This is what we know about the rates of return, because I've read Professor Bailey's research on this topic. You can't have random assignment with community colleges. It's difficult. But there are substantial benefits, so instead use fixed effect. Tell me if I get this right, Tom. You can actually critique it at the end if you want. So there are substantial benefits to completing an AA, positive. There are lesser but still positive benefits to a certificate. Modest benefits to still from attendance. Difficult to track transfer and dropout rates are too high. How am I doing? I got somewhere between a C+ and a B- on that. Right? Thank you. Intermediaries, job training programs. Job training programs are essentially the evolution of war on poverty job training programs. They're funded by the federal government, Department of Labor. They're funded by foundations. There's a lot of them out there. Job training programs. Do they work? Well, they have been random assignments. So this is a random results for a job training program in Texas that I've done a lot of work with. And the orange line is the compensation of the control group, and the blue line is the compensation of the treatment group, and the results are positive. And there are random assignment, RCTs, out there on job training programs which are positive. So job training programs work. Union programs, they would work, except there's very few of them. Scale is very small relative to the economy. And then all this new stuff, this is the next dissertation topic I'll recommend. We don't know anything about whether they work. We don't know if these coding academies work. We don't know about distance education. We don't know about, I'm not talking about the kind of rapacious for-profit training operations. I'm talking about what look like legitimate non-traditional training operations for profit. They're not assessed, they've not been evaluated, we don't know. So what's the training policy agenda? What should we think about? What about resources and employer commitment? What skills should be taught, and how to diffuse the good models? So the first point I want to make about training is that there's a radical shortfall in training. So the data are poor. The federal government stopped collecting data in around 2009 on how much training individual workers receive from their employer. But you can see a steady decline in training provided by employers over time. It's also the case, and this is more recent data, that training by employers is radically biased against low-wage workers. So workers who are asked, did they receive a certificate of any kind from an employer or a union? Low-wage workers are considerably less likely to answer yes than high-wage workers. Federal funding for training has declined, and by the way, that line goes down in the Obama administration as well as in the Trump administration. And that little red down at the bottom of that chart is the percentage of the GNP America spends on training relative to OECD countries. So there is a substantial shortfall of resources in this country, both on the part of employers and on the part of government devoted to training. What skills should be taught? It's a very hard question. It's a topic of much future of work, blah, blah, blah. But we need a way to think about this. So what skills are employers seeking, and how specialized and vocational should it be? One thing that's odd in the discussion about skills is that the payoff to a college degree has stagnated. So those two lines that you look at, the lighter blue is the payoff to a 4-year college degree, and the darker blue is the payoff to an advanced degree, master's, PhD, making your mother happy and being a doctor or whatever. And the college degree payoff relative to a high school degree has flattened. That's not to say it doesn't pay to go to college. It means that the ratio is not growing. Surveys of employers indicate they care as much about, and I've done some of these, as much about reading as they do about math and computers. And it's clear from the data that the payoff to soft skills, teamwork and the like, has grown, while the payoff to actually math and computers has not grown. But the most important point I want to make to you, the economics rhetoric about the future of work and the future of skills, the rhetoric is what you could call a barbell economy. A lot of jobs at the bottom and a lot of jobs at the top, and nothing in the middle. And it's fundamentally important to understand, in my view, that that's wrong. So to illustrate this, look at production workers, blue-collar workers. According to Bureau of Labor Statistics, in the next 10 years, there'll be about 400,000 less of these people. But there's going to be about 1.6 million openings for these people in the next 10 years. And why is that? Because of the retirement of the baby boom generation. Everyone but me. So look at a set of middle-skilled jobs. Healthcare, office, administration, construction. These are genuine middle-skilled jobs. They accounted for 37% of employment in 2016, and they're only going to account for 16% of net job growth. So they're declining. Middle-skilled jobs are declining, right? No. Because of the retirements, they're going to account for a lot of openings. But depending on what age you think people are going to retire, there'll be between 6 and 12 million openings. And if you're a community college or a job training program, what you really care about are these openings. You don't care about the percentage of these jobs in the economy. You care about, are there openings? And so there will be a continued demand for middle-skilled jobs. Job training programs are going to have to balance this tension between general skills and employer-specific skills, and that's a tension that has to be managed. So last two slides. The training policy agenda. The big picture is resources. It's access to training. And it's the American system is a system in which there's multiple pathways and entry points to training and to maintain that. And in the weeds, we need to think about how to connect to employers. This is, I get my travel money paid. We need to use best practice in terms of improving community colleges. And we need to diffuse best practice with respect to intermediaries and to move to a greater scale. So that's kind of, yes, that's me. So thank you very much. That's what I have to say.